Hari Om. We can reduce the gain by a little bit. Let's reduce the gain by a little bit. Yeah. Hari Om. Can you hear me out there? Hari Om. Hari Om. Hari Om. Okay. When it comes to understanding my true nature, that's the goal of this entire Janma, why we've taken this birth, it seems as though the statements given to me to pursue that path are hard to understand. After all, when it said, look within, what does that even mean? When it said, forget the lower, seek the higher, what are these statements supposed to mean? I need some kind of framework. Before I come to these kinds of statements that are summarizing basic concepts, I have to understand what is that roadmap, what is that basic level I can start with here and now. And as we saw yesterday, the understanding of the gunas, the textures of my personality, how they arise, what role do they play in my specific inner instrument that I have, and what consequences does that lead to, either favorable or unfavorable. So yesterday in this fourth shloka in Hamsa Gita, elaborately, we saw in 10 different areas of life, all the way from what kind of jnanam do we pursue, to deshaha, the places we find ourselves in, even agamaha, the type of scripture and the purpose for studying that scripture. All of these different factors in my life can be grouped into sattva, rajas, or tamas. This foolproof method is the first step to me looking inward. An honest look at my personality without any kind of veneer of glossiness or any kind of pitiful sorrow that I find myself in. An honest look at what my personality is. And today we go further. Where Uddhava's question now is a very interesting one. 8th shloka. Vidanti martyah prayena vishayan padamapapadam tathapi bhunjate krishna tatkatham svakarajavat. That we know so clearly that objects of the senses that I'm so attracted to, they only lead to sorrow. He's on board there. He says, these objects I run after only lead to sorrow. And the question is, why do I keep going after them then? And he gives 3 examples that are very lovely to see. Shva, of a dog. Kara, of a donkey. Ajaha, of a goat. These 3 he gives. They run after objects senselessly. Why do I also behave like them? And very specifically, he lists these 3 animals. Why? A dog will always salivate when it sees a bone. And when you hold the bone, you can make it go in different directions. And like we are at the eye doctor, the dog will also turn its head like this, following that bone. You toss it, you can toss it into a swimming pool or a river or anywhere. The dog has no distinction of where it's being tossed to. It'll follow that bone in there until it gets it. The dog inherently knows, I can't swim, I can't stay in this river. All of that is dismissed. It'll follow that bone till its very end if it has to. So why do I follow objects like that bone? Where I know it's going in a place for my own destruction, yet I mindlessly follow these objects. Another thing about the dog. The owner can hit the dog abusing it, but the moment that same owner gives the bone, it'll run up to that owner. There is no memory that, oh, this person mistreated me. Out of remembrance of that, when he offers me a bone, I still won't take it. The object takes precedence even over self-respect. That's the life of a dog. That's what Uddhava is pointing out. Second example he gives, kara, of a donkey. Donkeys, you know how they defend themselves against other animals? They kick. Donkeys are really good kickers. They take their two hind legs and they kick really hard. Another animal that kicks really hard is a kangaroo. Like that, donkeys also kick. So when a male donkey sees a female donkey, like that. And then the male donkey will go to the female donkey. And for the female donkey to resist that male donkey and to say, I don't, want to be with you, she kicks. Probably at that time, mentally, she's saying, Are gadhe, and she kicks the gadhe after that. So, like that, these sense objects I go after, it's not that even I find myself in trouble. The objects I go after keep on kicking me. Whether it's alliances I'm trying to make, whether it's situations I find myself in where that object is detrimental to my health, that's the object kicking me. Yet, like that donkey, I still go after it with great fervor. Sometimes the more I get kicked by it, I find that at least some attention is coming to me from some object. I go after it even more. That's living like a donkey. Finally, he gives the example of ajaha, a goat. When it's time for the goats to get slaughtered, they go in one line. That goat will see the goat in front of it getting slaughtered. It'll still move up when the line moves up, though. Like that, I see objects hurting others around me. And it's said that stupid people learn mistakes by going through it. Smart people observe others, learning from their mistakes and consequences. Yet I find myself like that goat, seeing others bitten by these objects. I still fervently go after them as well. So Uddhava here does not pick any random animals. The three animals he picks, dog, donkey, and a goat, very specific reasons here. Saying, knowing this world of objects and how it treats me, why do I still go after them like the animals do? And then, what is Bhagavan's answer? Shri Bhagavan uvacha ahamityan buddhihi pramattasya yatha hridi utsarpati rajo ghoram tato vaikarikam manaha. That what is holding me back, what leads to that pramada, that danger, is this wrong notion of I. What I think of as I is wrong. That's why this whole problem starts. And the beauty of this question being answered here is, he doesn't start with the mind is a slave to objects, not even at that level. Root cause analysis is what Bhagavan Krishna does here, saying the very fact that this I notion is false is the beginning of the problem. That's the end of the problem as well. Let's explore that then. When I say I, what am I referring to? When I say I as I'm transacting with the world, I say I is this Hari Chaitanya, this embodiment of body, mind, and intellect. That's what I'm considering as that I. Now, two things to understand here, two important entities. There is Shuddha Atma, pure consciousness. That which is not tainted by any kind of quality. That consciousness without any beginning nor end. That consciousness which is pure from any kind of vritti or any kind of ripple in it. That is that pure consciousness, Shuddha Atma. Then there's the Jivatma. Jivatma is that borrowed consciousness that gives me this spark of life. This entity which gives me that spark, which makes me think I am this Hari Chaitanya. So I have to be one of these two things. Either I'm Shuddhatma or I'm this borrowed consciousness, Jivatma. One of these two things has to be I. Let's start there. And what is meant by I here? If I say I am walking, I am eating, I am crying, I am laughing, I am smart, I am stupid, I am thin, I am fat, I am short, I am tall. We went through physical descriptions, emotional descriptions with that I. We went through things we can change, things we can't change. All of these different factors associated with that I. which means I is the bhokta, the experiencer. In essence, any of these descriptors I say, I am whatever, fill in the blank, everything comes back to I am bhokta, I am the experiencer. That's my false I notion. Who is this experiencer? It has to be either I, this Shuddha Atma, or it has to be I, this Jivatma. One of the two has to be that experiencer. Let's go with Shuddhatma. Can that pure consciousness be an experiencer? Pure consciousness undergoes no change. There's no action associated with it, no change. Anytime I experience anything in this world of changing objects, a change is what that I has to go through. This pure consciousness cannot be that I then. So naturally, the experiencer must be this Jivatma, right? This borrowed consciousness. Without that Shuddha Atma, that taken out of the picture, Jivatma, there's no such thing. It's Jada, this entire assemblage right here. Only because of that pure consciousness, we can say there is borrowed consciousness. What can a Jada Vastu enjoy? What kind of bhokta can it be? Without this Jivatma spark of life, Lasha is all there's left, a corpse. It can't experience anything. Therefore, Jivatma is not the experiencer either. What is the experiencer then? It has to be, as Gurudev calls it, an unholy matrimony of that Shuddha Atma and Jivatma. When it's enlivened in this Jiva, that entity is the experiencer. Now, one step further. Only Shuddha Atma exists. This Jivatma is unreal. How can we say that? Going back to yesterday. That which is existent, that which is real, must be present in all three periods of time. In the past, in the present, in the future. There is no time when the Shuddha Atma was not there. There will be no time when the Shuddha Atma does not persist. Jivatma has a beginning and an end. Date of birth and date of death, right away. Therefore, it's unreal. The only real entity then is that Shuddha Atma. Is it the experiencer? No, it cannot be bhokta. Therefore, experience is unreal then. Experience is nothing but an illusion. Why is that important here? That because my notion of what I is associated with that experiencer, which is false in the first place, what I think is I is false completely. That false I, assuming that its happiness comes from objects, I go after the world of objects, conditioned by rajas. That's what Bhagavan is pointing out here. So let's examine the beauty of what he's just said. He's not pointing at any one object and saying, this is what attracts you, so let go of this object. This situation is what tempts you, let go of that situation. An alliance with this kind of person sways you, so stay away from that person. He doesn't go anything in the periphery. Root cause is your I notion is wrong. That's why any trouble seems to plague you. You take yourself as an experiencer. That's the very wrong issue you have in the first place. On top of that, to make that false entity happy, I go through the world, gaining object after object, experiencer after experience. That's where the fault lies. Now, how bad is this I notion? What kind of terrible rajas does it lead to? First way to tell how strong is this wrong notion in me is, which standpoint do I make decisions from? Is it from an emotional standpoint? Is it from an intellectual standpoint? Where is it I think and then I go making a choice, or is it I feel and then I go making a choice? Where if I make decisions out of emotion rather than logic, chances are I regret these decisions later. Simply because every time I follow my emotions, it's for some fleeting purpose, that which is not totally thought through. Mind over actual logic, then, leads me to great peril. That's one part of it. Now, how is this exemplified in our own Shastra, then? If we look at Tulsi Ramayana, there's a section, Rama Gita. where Bhagavan Sri Ramchandra ji gives an exposition to the people of Ayodhya after being consecrated as their leader. He speaks on sadhu lakshana at that point. And one beautiful thing he says, one quality of the sadhu is, ninda astuti ubhaya sama, that in the face of ninda, censure, or stuti, which is that great praise, that person of wisdom stays even-minded there. Where understanding that I can't get carried away from any external opinion, that leads to that lowering of rajas then. Where my value, what I think of my own self-worth, is not predicated on the fleeting, changing opinions of others. It's something much deeper than that. That's the sadhu lakshana. But when this rajas takes hold, even those who are at the heights of that sattva, with great immeasurable power, rajas can take them over. Because yesterday we talked about rajas binds. How does it bind? If we look at Mahabharata, Dronacharya ji, a very good example. When Bhagavan Sri Krishna came in contact with Sudama came to him saying, we studied together, now I'm not doing so well, can you give me some help? He didn't even have to ask for it, Bhagavan blessed him with plenty. Similar situation. Dronacharya ji was a poor brahmana, not having much with him, approaches Drupada, who was his classmate when they were studying, and he says, I'm down on my luck a bit, can you please give me something? Drupada laughs at him. Like we said yesterday, hang out with people at your income level so that you're not putting yourself at great peril. Drupada says the same thing, but in a mean way. Who are you and what am I? Yeah, we studied together back then. I'm a big king now. You're a penniless pauper coming to me for help. How can we call each other friends, man? What is this? I can't be seen interacting with you. Dronacharya takes that insult to heart so much, he says, I will get my vengeance on Drupada. His next immediate destination is where? To the Kauravas. Or he helps them retrieve a ball from a well. And the boys in Bhishma are very impressed by that. And then Bhishma commissions him to teach the 100 Kaurava boys and the 5 Pandava boys. And what is the final Guru Dakshina that they give him? Dronacharya ji asks each of them, there is one Guru Dakshina I need from you at the end of your studies. Say yes now, before I even tell you what it is. It's kind of logic kids use, right? Mom, Dad, I want something. Before I tell you what I want you to buy, you have to agree to say yes. That's a scary risk. When they're young, it could be a pack of gum. If your 16-year-old comes and says that to you, though, that could be a big expenditure. So be careful making those kind of promises. Who is the only Pandava who says yes without even knowing what it is, I'll fulfill it for you? Arjuna. He says yes, whatever your bidding is. Vachanam tavam karishye is what he says. Dronacharya ji says, go tie up Drupada, humiliate him for me. So he held on to that anger from the time of being insulted by Drupada all the way to going and seeking out these Pandavas, training them year after year, refining their skill set with that one purpose to go and disparage Drupada. All of that vengeance for one moment like that. And we say, oh, Hariji, that's just in Mahabharata to teach a lesson. No one really holds on to things that much. That much rajas no one holds on to. Really? Let's give a funny example then from today's day and age. They had one panel interview recently celebrating the 100th year of the NFL, National Football League. 100 years, so a special panel thing. They got players from age whenever. Of course, the people that started the NFL, they're long gone. But those people that played in the 40s and the 50s, some of them are still around, they got them. So one guy, when he was playing, he was ferocious. Now he's been, confined to a wheelchair and he's old now, sitting there with a cane. But he's on stage, sitting there. One other guy, equally as strong as he is, comes onto the stage. This guy sees that other football player. he started hitting him with his cane. They had to go and break those guys up. Why? In the championship game in the 1953 championship that they had, that guy apparently gave him a dirty hit where he was already out of bounds. This guy came and hit him. That hurt him. This many years later, seeing that guy, he said, I have to beat you up with my cane. That was his first reaction. So please tell me, again, how people don't hold on to grudges like this. This is rajas at play. That it's more comfortable to hold on to that anger than ever let it go. And to his credit, at that age, to remember what you're angry about is really hard to do. At that age, remembering anything is hard, so that part is commendable at least. There's that story I heard where there's an old man, widower, and he saw an old lady who's also a widow. They're both comfortably in their 90s. He thought, with whatever days I have left, I should get married. Why live single in these last few days? So he went up to that woman and he said, will you marry me? And to his great surprise, she looked at him through her cataracts, and with her dentures in her mouth, she said, yes, I will marry you. He was so happy. Even at his age, he got up and he started doing a little dance, and then he went home. Then he suddenly got confused. I remember asking that woman, would she marry me? I forgot if she said yes or not. So he got really insecure all of a sudden. So he called her up. He said, hey, I asked you to marry me. Did you say yes or no? She said, I said yes. But good thing that you called, I forgot who I said yes to. So at that age, holding on to grudges, we still hold on at that age, even if we don't clearly remember the day-to-day things that happen. Rajas has that effect. Now, the next two shlokas go through what is this nature of rajas? Meaning, how do I recognize it in myself to see where my problems lie? So when the mind is overpowered by rajas, there will be a constant brooding on my desires. Constant brooding. Where if I want to test the nature of my mind, just test where does it go when it's at rest? What is the baseline that it goes to? Being in solitude for a little bit. Solitude means this thing is not disturbing me. These people are not disturbing me. This thing is not bothering me. All of these things are away. Just me and my mind. And going on a walk doesn't count because there's so much stimuli. You see the dog peeing over there. You see these people running there. There's trees moving around. All of that will distract. That gives vrittis. Away from everything, simply with this mind. Where does my mind go in those moments then, in that solitude? Is it some shubha vichara, some nice thought that comes? Is it anxiety that the mind settles on? Is it some negative spiral it engages in? Where does that mind even go? And in today's day and age, it's hard to even fathom where the mind could go, because when are we actually in solitude? People say, oh, when I'm driving, that's solitude. It better not be solitude. I hope you're focusing on the road and the cars and the people, or else I'll get off the road if you say that that's solitude time. Solitude time is when this mind is completely at rest. Where does that mind go? Because we see in the second chapter of Bhagavad Gita, fall of man is elaborately described. Very starting pada of that is, dhyayato vishayan pumsaha dhyayataha. Dhyayataha, like dhyanam, that rumination. Ruminating on what? Vishayan. All these countless objects around me. Who is the one ruminating on these objects? Pumsaha. Pumsaha is not your average Joe. Pumsaha is that person of great mental equanimity, someone who has had the strength persistently to resist objects of the world, someone who is a sincere sadhaka, dedicated to owning up this liberation. That is pumsaha. Even he, we find, falls down this ladder of fall. That first pada is very important there. Starts with dhyayataha. What is that rumination? Which is why it's so important. In that fourth shloka yesterday, dhyanam was one of those factors we looked at to see, do we classify it as sattvic, rajasic, or tamasic? Dwelling on the external, wanting things, that is purely in the realm of that rajasic. What kind of mental gymnastics do I go by? What are the dominoes that fall? Very first thought will be, my enjoyment should not be cut short. My enjoyment should not be cut short. You ever take your kids to Chuck E. Cheese or somewhere where they're having fun? You have to say it's time to go home 10 minutes before you actually want to leave. Prying aunties away from a party is the same thing. 10 minutes before you want to leave, you have to say it's time to go. Because there's goodbyes that take place there, or 5 more minutes I want to play. Time for dinner, then 10 minutes before you have to say it, because that takes that long to get away from the video game. So let my enjoyment not be cut short is everyone's inherent feeling that they have, easily. From that, the next domino is, let my enjoyment go on increasing. Who is happy having just one video game or one toy to play with, one car to drive? Let my joy grow increasing on and on and on. It should be more than what is right now. That's what makes me happier. Having the same enjoyments gets very stale. That's why Apple comes out with a new iPhone every single year. Right around this time of year too, right? Forcing us to buy it. Let my joy go on increasing. Another dominoes to fall, let obstacles not stop my enjoyment. That if there is some authority figure saying that this must be curtailed, you cannot have all of these things, that makes me very angry at that moment. Nothing should even stop my enjoyment. And finally, I am blessed because of this enjoyment. Because I'm going and enjoying all of these things, that's what gives me that true happiness. There is not happiness elsewhere. That's how I bind myself in that rajas. In every one of these instances, no outside force is binding me to rajas. I'm doing that all by myself. I can say the objects have a hold over me. It's me going and holding on to them. Next shloka is an interesting one as well. It says that if I'm enslaved by these desires, I am completely deluded. I lose control over my senses. Effects of materialism. Now, when it comes to the philosophies we find in Bharata, the most basic philosophy that is given a seat at the table to express what their views are is the Charvaka philosophy, what we translate into English as materialistic philosophy. Their basic premise is enjoying objects of the world is what gives happiness. Don't worry about any other consequence. If the purpose of life is to be happy, then go on enjoying those objects. That's what makes you happy. Now, when it comes to a lifestyle that we live, lifestyle is usually predicated on some kind of a philosophy. Advaita philosophy is that my true nature is that changeless entity, that substratum, which is far beyond and more subtle than this assemblage that I think that I am. In a nutshell, we can say that is the Advaita philosophy. When that is the driving force, the sadhanas that I take up in my lifestyle are those that promote that kind of thinking, getting away from objects of the world, worship of that Bhagavan so that vairagya increases, that yearning desire for liberation, understanding what my true nature is, understanding that Bhagavat Tattva, becoming that devotee, sanding down my likes and dislikes through karma yoga, all of this is taken up as a lifestyle then, geared towards that goal. Now, when it comes to materialism, wanting more, is it that a philosophy is what I need to live that kind of a lifestyle? Is it that I read in a book saying, oh, objects are good, go for objects so you can be happy? Is that what I do? Or is it inherently my nature to go after these things? So in any case, materialism is not that it's a philosophy giving birth to a lifestyle. It's a lifestyle justified by a philosophy. That's where we find ourselves as materialists. Now, what's the curious thing about materialism? Materialism can deceptively look like progress. You look at any civilization, over time, we say they have progressed. In what ways? And look, we have clean water to drink, we have clean air to breathe here. In the olden days, some of you live in Allen, some of you live in Plano, some of you are in the Irving area. To come here in the olden days, meaning way, way, way hundreds of years ago, in your horse and your buggy, it would have taken you about 2 days to get here, and by then satsang would have been over. Today's day and age, no matter if you're 20 miles away, 30 miles away, you get in a car, you go where you have to go. After dark, we even travel. We have lights and everything. So materialism was because someone thought, why can't we do this? They made the pains to go through and do it, and here we are today enjoying it. Materialism can look like progress. No one will find the faults in that. Materialism can also express as Vedanta. Materialism is the kind of life where I don't have any consequences for my action. Just let Rajas take over, go by that. So even if my actions means I have to cut off alliances with people, focusing on myself, I can do that as a materialist. I can say that these relationships that, they are cumbersome to deal with and everything, let me cut those off, let me focus on my own happiness. I can also say in materialism that, there's no reason to be enslaved by the world and everything going on. Let me chart my own path, not caring what others think. All of this sounds deceptively like Vedanta, but the goal is something different. There is no talk of duty and responsibility, therefore that's materialism. Easy to get confused by that. And thirdly, we can say that through materialism, Vedanta says exhaust your vasanas by going and expressing whatever tendency there is. Materialism says we're saying the same thing. You have a talent for being extroverted and doing this, go exhaust the vasana that way. What they're missing is that also strengthens the vasana though. It's half-hearted Vedanta becomes materialism then. A half-baked idea of Vedanta. Now, why do we bring this up here? Because even though we all profess that we're studying Vedanta sincerely about it, in the 24 hours I have in a day, how much of them am I thinking like a Vedantin? How much of that time do I think like a materialist? I'm speaking for myself here. 90% of the time, I'm thinking like a materialist. Or discussions with people is what can I get from that person? When it comes to my own understanding of myself, it's what talents can I use to go get those objects of the world? When the thinking goes in that route, then, at the end of the day, am I actually a Vedantin or am I masquerading as a Vedantin purely as a materialist? That's a question that each one of us can only answer for ourselves. No one else can tell me. Because intention is what matters there a lot. So then comes the 12th shloka, where the question is answered here that even mature seekers then have to deal with this rajas and this tamas. How do they do that? Rajas tamo bhyam yadapi vidvan vikshiptadhiv punaha atandrito mano yunjan dosha drishtirna sajjate. Dosha drishti. Dosha drishti means to see the faults in the sense pleasures. See the defects in the sense pleasures. Now, this takes great thinking, great strength to actually believe it also. What are some of these defects that are in the sense objects? One is association with temporariness. No matter how good some external experience is, it's short-lived. The memory of that experience can make me happy in the future, only for a certain amount of time before I want that object again. Temporariness is there with the object. Association with pain. Association with pain is, with that temporariness, this is how ghazal singers find their food in association with pain. Do hi guzre hain kathind. 2 times in my life which were the worst. Ek tere aane se pehle, before you came into my life. Ek tere jaane ke baad, after you left my life. Association with pain brought on by that temporariness. No matter how sweet the memories are of enjoying that object or that friendship or that situation or that stature position, once it's gone, and it may not come back. Association with pain there. The sense objects cause dependence as well. If I go to someone's house for a bhiksha, one day they offer a sweet, I have it. If I'm staying at their place. Next day the sweet comes. Next day the sweet comes also. 4th day, either they ran out of sugar or they ran out of time, whatever it is. The meal happens and you're sitting there waiting and the sweet doesn't come. In that moment, even having that thought, not an angry thought, just that thought of, there's no sweet, something's out of the ordinary, that's that dependence that's right there. The fact that an expectation even arose from some kind of habit that's been performed repeatedly, 3 days it's been repeated, that creates an impression in the mind, that craving is there. That dependence is there. Now, that's a tiny dependence that creates a flutter in the mind. Imagine the kind of dependence where you're something like an army officer. Anywhere you go on the base, everyone puts a salute and everything is Haji Haji. From the guy that drives you to cooks your food, to the people out in the city, everyone is Haji Haji. You come home and you discipline your kid, is he going to say Haji Haji to everything you say? Like any teenager who'll say, get lost, I want to do what I want to do. So that dependence on the external situations, how they go, I want that replicated in all my areas of life with everyone and how they interact with me. And I hope it's not going to happen. Bad news. That dependence will be there. So just with these reasons, we see that following this rajasic kind of lifestyle, the defects are there in all of these objects. Do I see those defects before it's too late? Do I control that mind? Now that's one layer of explanation of how do those mature seekers resist those layers of rajas and tamas. There's an even deeper explanation we can look to. For instance, the moon on a cloudless Purnima full moon day, the moon shines nice and bright. If you have a bucket of water, a big bucket of water that you put out there, you can see that moon's reflection in that water. Now, if that water is muddy, that moon that is resplendent in white will appear splotchy and dark in that water. If you shake that bucket vigorously, that moon appears as if it's dancing in that water, like the moon is moving. So the moon remains the same. That entity is unchanging, always the same. What happens to this water dictates how that moon appears to me in that reflection. Similarly, that Brahman, that pristine substratum underlying this whole srishti is the same. It must express as well. The way it expresses is based on the quality of this mind here. If this mind is trending towards tamasic desires, that very substratum, that spark of life that it's giving me, comes out in the avenues of the most basic forms of depravity. That's what tamas is. If it comes through that lens of rajas, that same spark of life with full potential, is then frenetically only engaged in activity, mindlessly guided by emotion that are in their instrument. So it's like that moon being reflected. Now, here we go to the mind even deeper then. Vritti. I'm going to say the definition. You tell me what the word is, okay? Usually word and then definition. No, definition, it's an English word, okay? So don't worry. I'll say the definition, you say the word. Disturbance in the mind. Agitation, disturbance in the mind. Thought is the word. When I say disturbance, you went negative right away. Negative connotation was given to it. It's like there's a placid lake. It's like a sheet of water. If you go to a lake in the morning, before the fishes are even awake, fish are even awake and swimming around, it looks completely placid, like a sheet of water. In there, you drop one little pebble, there is that ripple effect. That tiny pebble creates even a small ripple. That ripple travels yards and yards and yards and even causes a disturbance right there. That is the nature of a thought. This mind is placid, at rest. A vritti, a thought, is like that stone being dropped in there. Completely neutral term, a thought. Now, these vrittis can come also, you guessed it, as sattvic vrittis, rajasic vrittis, tamasic vrittis, in these different shades. Whenever I have a sattvic vritti, that consciousness in all its glory, in that bliss, is reflected. Sattva is the nature of that joy, after all. In a tamasic vritti or rajasic vritti, that ananda, bliss factor, is not expressed in those thoughts, but that chit factor is. The consciousness is still expressed right there in that thought, even if not bliss. So like that moon that's being reflected in different ways, that reality, that substratum being expressed in this buddhi, comes through what kind of vritti do I entertain. Now, this is the fun part right here. There are two examples given by Vidyaranya Swamiji that show how these tamasic thoughts differ from rajasic thoughts. It's beautiful to see here. He gives an example that when there is a pot of water that you want to heat up, you put it over a fire. That water gets heated up. The fire's heat is given to that water. Is the fire's appearance given to that water, though? Meaning, does the water, is like a flaming water, has flames coming out of it then? No, only the heat is transferred. Appearance is not transferred there. That kind of a situation is when that rajas and tamas only show that consciousness aspect in those thoughts. The bliss, ananda aspect is not there, only that consciousness aspect is there. Now imagine the situation where there is a wooden stick or a log that catches fire. The heat factor is being transferred to that log. Yes. That fiery appearance factor is being transferred to the log. Definitely is. That is what a sattvic vritti is like. Both the heat and the light are manifested. That chit consciousness aspect plus that ananda aspect, both are present there. So when I have a thought, analyzing the thoughts that I have, seeing which aspects are expressed here. Is it simply that consciousness thought where there is no ananda, making it a tamasic or rajasic thought? Is there that ananda factor as well, making it sattvic? Now one objection comes into play. Following tamasic avenues and rajasic avenues, doesn't that still give me ananda in some way? It does. This is where that dharma factor comes in that we saw before. From yesterday, dharma we went into in depth in the beginning, right? That analysis is necessary, not just looking at, is it making me happy? If it's making me happy but adharmic, that's bad for my growth. So the first thing is this thought following in a dharmic vein? Then seeing, do I recognize simply the consciousness aspect of this thought, observing it? Is there that ananda as well? And analyzing thoughts this way through the framework of the gunas, I see what are the amounts of sattvic vrittis that I have, how often do those sattvic vrittis come up, what triggers those sattvic thoughts as well. Now, this is where, to complete that puzzle, sadhana comes into place as well. Because whenever we hand out japa malas and we say this sadhana of japa is important, who cares? Sitting there repeating Bhagavan's name again and again, nothing's good's going to happen. That's how that sattva is increased. That instead of the mind, when it's at rest, being in the doldrums of tamas or being in that hamster wheel of rajas, let it rest in sattva. That is the effect of that repeated japa done for years and years over time. That even at rest, the mind will rest in sattva in no other realm. That's how we close the loop on all of this. So what a beautiful set of examples given by Vidyaranya Swamiji here. That water, when it's heated up, that fire's heat is transferred but not the light. When a log is set on fire, light and heat are both transferred. That is analogous to just the consciousness aspect or the consciousness and the bliss that's given. And if I can reject the misery and still appreciate that this thought has consciousness, I'm identifying the thought as a rajasic or tamasic thought. That helps me elevate myself. This framework is great for reflection as well. Now, Uddhava asked one more question. How do we get over attachment to sense pleasure? Apramatto nyuyunjita manomayarpayanchanaihi anirvinno yatha kalam jitashvaso jitasanaha. What do we do to get over this attraction to sense pleasures? First thing Bhagavan says is, fix your mind on me. Mayarpita manobuddhihi. As he says in Gita, put your mind on me. Now we find this difficult to do. Arjuna says the same thing in Bhagavad Gita. When he says, fix your mind on me, the best way is, the best kind of devotee is the one who effortlessly has his mind on me. Doesn't even try to have to do it, effortlessly has his mind on me. That means he's thinking about me at all times. Then we say, Bhagavan, that's so hard to do. Effortlessly putting my mind on you is really hard to do. This is okay. One level less. This comes in 12th chapter of Bhagavad Gita. One level less is, at least intentionally put me in your mind. Sit at your altar, contemplate on my form for a given amount of time a day, intentionally put me in your mind. We say, Bhagavan, I'm so busy, 21st century man, so much to do, I can't do all that. Deliberately putting you in my mind. Okay? You said you're busy. At least when you're acting in the world outside, because you claim you're busy, that must be you're doing some action out there. As you're acting out there, dedicate your actions to me at least. Effortlessly, I won't come into your mind. Deliberately, also, you're saying you can't do it. At least offer your actions at my feet then, and those results. Bhagavan, I can't do that either. The actions I do, they're selfish just for me. You don't really get a slice of the pie in that one. Okay? Don't even do actions for me then. At least don't act selfishly in the first place. Can you do that at least? And that's as low as Bhagavan goes, okay? Lower than that, he's not willing to go either. He says starting point is at least don't do action selfishly. From that point, offer your actions to me. From that point, deliberately keep you in your mind. From that point, effortlessly, I'll stay in your mind. This is nothing but going through the gunas. If I have a tamasic or rajasic mindset, everything I do will be selfish. Bhagavan plays no role in the results, in this very karaka, equipment doing the activity. Bhagavan has no role at all. From there, offering my actions to Bhagavan takes two parts. One, is the action I'm doing worthy of offering to Bhagavan? If I'm going to someone's house to give them a gift, housewarming or something, standard gift you take is a bouquet of flowers. Now, those flowers, when you give to someone when you're going to their house, are they nice, healthy, bulbous? Maybe they're painted or natural, whatever it is. Are they still healthy-looking flowers? Or do you take those that are like this with the red rose turning black? Do you say, here you go, welcome to your new house? We give the nicest flowers we can. In the same way, offering my actions to Bhagavan, is it this half-hearted, adharmic action I offer to him? Or do I give him my best? That raises me from Rajas to Sattva right there. After offering my best in that action, next level is deliberately I can keep him in my mind then. Or else like in Aarti when we sing, Kis vidh minu daya mein, how do I find your kripa? We don't have to sing and cry about that. If my actions improve, automatically I'll feel comfortable in that presence of Bhagavan. From that level, naturally that Bhagavan occupies my mind. So mayarpita manobuddhi, fixing your mind in me is what Bhagavan says. Next part he says in this shloka, apramattaha, being vigilant. Apramattaha. Where there is that attention to detail there. Those Yuva Kendra members and those secretaries who worked for Gurudev at that time, so many of them have a common story that even when it comes to answering his mail that he would get from devotees from around the world, when replying to them, he would make sure the envelope was sealed the right way. The letter, when it's folded, when we fold a letter, sometimes the pages, they don't really align. He would get really angry about that. He'd fold them the right way, is what he'd say. And people would bristle, saying, why does that matter so much? Sending a letter, why does it matter how perfect it's folded? He would clearly say, you want to focus on that highest knowledge that takes so much attention to detail to know that truth. If you can't do this perfectly, what darn hope do you have of getting that? Therefore, sweat the details. Sweat the small stuff. That is the way forward. So apramattaha, making sure that there's the vigilance in every single action. Shanaihi, slowly. There is no race. In any kind of skill set we want to master, it's usually in competition with someone else. Any skill set in the world in competition with someone else. I saw a funny Facebook post recently to humble someone. No matter how good you are at a skill, remember there's a 12-year-old Asian boy who's probably better at it than you are. True. True. We talk about piano prodigies, athletes, mathematicians. There is some 12-year-old kid somewhere that's better at anything that I can do, for sure. This spiritual path is not a competition like that. Someone asked Gurudev, what are the markers to know if someone is more spiritual than someone else? And Gurudev said it's not like having horns on your head, that, I'm a little bit spiritual, so 4-inch horns, a lot spiritual, 8-inch horns. Thank God it's not like that. That's not how it works. So shanaihi, understanding that this change will happen gradually. And the ironic part is, the moment I feel that, my mind is so pure, my mind has gotten so good, next moment I fall. That's also reminded here. What's one more quality from the shloka? Anirvirnaha, without despondency. That I cannot feel disgusted with myself in this process. When we were at the Youth Empowerment Program, there's a whole module that Swami Sarveshananji led us through on introspection. So he gave us a method. He said, in a journal that you have a line in the middle with 2 parts. In blue ink, on the left side, write the good thoughts and the good deeds that you did that day, in blue ink. In red ink, those actions and thoughts of negativity and jealousy and anger and hatred and greed and lust and all of that, write it in red. In black, on the other side, next to each of these, red or blue, write down what triggered this thought or action. Now, he gave a disclaimer as well. The first few months that you do this kind of journaling, what color will your notebook be the most? Red. He said it will look like you cut yourself open and just bled all over the page. That's what it will look like. True. The moment I start that introspection, looking at myself honestly, not the face I put for others, looking at myself honestly, it will look like there's nothing but negativity in my personality. But then anirvirnaha, that despondency cannot set in right there. I cannot be terribly unhappy just by that and feel dejected. It's funny, in Guruji's commentary, Guruji has a beautiful commentary on Hamsa Gita, by the way. Someone was asking me recently, what is the text that we can go by? Guruji's commentary. And I found it, given what happened a few weeks ago, very apt that this line is in there. He said, he's talking about the eagerness we have for happiness. How excited is the cricket fan at the prospect of watching the World Cup, is what it says here. So I hope it's not too soon to make that joke, but that's what I found in the commentary. Very interesting line right there. So, anirvinnaha, without that despondency. So these are the markers that are given to resist this tamas and rajas and go for that sattvic understanding. The next question that comes up is, the worldly mind that I have, it's really hard to withdraw it away from the world of objects and only have it focused on that Bhagavan. It's still hard to do that. And so now the narrative part of this story comes about, where these Sanat Kumaras, the mind-born sons of Brahmaji, they always appear in the form of Bhatus, little boys. They're Maharishis. They're completely enlightened, but they appear in that form. But even they have questions. So they go to Brahmaji and they ask him a very profound question. So this entire time, it took me a day and a half to get to this point right here. This is the question of Hamsa Gita. We finally come to what Hamsa Gita is saying now. What is the question? Sanakadaya uchuhu. That means the Sanakadaya is asked. Guneshva vishate chetaha gunashchetasi cha prabho kathamanyonyayas tyagaha mumukshodati tirshayoho. Their question is a very simple one. There are objects all around. The mind goes to these objects. Whenever there's a vritti, thought in the inner instrument, it takes the shape of whatever object it's thinking about, meaning the mind is with that object. The objects also come to the mind. As much as we try not to let them, objects also come to the mind. So the Sanaka and his brothers, their question is, for that seeker of this moksha, liberation, how can they separate this mind from the objects? Now, to even come to this question, let's take a look at why it was necessary to do all this legwork before even coming to this question. Because the first objection we have to this question could be, why? Why separate mind from the objects? If I know no other world, all I know is a mind means it has to go out and have objects as its domain. I cannot fathom the fact the mind must be separated from it. Because think of one day, nay, 1 hour in my waking moments where my mind was not occupied with some kind of object. Ain't possible. So the first question is, why should it be separated? That's not something that even comes up. Second objection that could come up is, what is the benefit of that separation, mind from the objects? Anything I have achieved to make myself happy in this external world, my mind was attracted or attached to an object, I worked for it to get that thing, that's what led me to success. And that's dharmically done, and I'm enjoying this dharmic happiness. What's wrong with that? So first, why should it be separated? What is the benefit? Third objection that could come up, it's not possible to separate the mind from the object. Just not possible. Now, to even come to this question and not have these objections, we had to go through the legwork of Uddhava's conversation with Bhagavan, where he clearly went through the gunas and their effects. That in itself should bring us to this question of, let the mind be separated from the objects. That is the only way. Because Bhagavan didn't attack the different objects and attraction to them as the problem. He said, my very I notion is the problem. Therefore, mind must be a separate entity from this object. Clearly, it has to be that way. Now, they went to Brahmaji and they asked this question. Brahmaji's answer was interesting. He said, I have so many things going on. I'm preoccupied with my own work. Karmadhihi is what he says he is right now. When brahmachari becomes karmachari also, that can happen. He says, so much work is going on, I have no time to answer your question. I'm sorry. Then what happens? Bhagavan comes in the form of a swan after Brahmaji meditated on that Bhagavan. Bhagavan Mahavishnu comes in the form of a swan to give this knowledge. Swan, Hamsa. Now, what is the beauty of him coming in the form of a swan? If you ever have milk mixed with water, can you separate the two? A swan can. A swan can separate the milk from the water. That which we think is indelibly mixed as one solution cannot separate one from the other, just like the mind and the objects. We see that it can be separated through great vichara and great prayatna, self-effort. Here in the same way, when we think milk and water, something so indelibly linked cannot be separated, the Hamsa, the swan, is the one that can separate the two. From that metaphorical standpoint, what better teacher to teach us how to separate them? Such a beautiful example given. Now the first question that Uddhava had, this is still a narration between Uddhava and Bhagavan Sri Krishna. He's talking about what he did as the swan, telling Uddhava about it. He says, what was the response of the Sanakadayaha when they saw you in this form of a swan? He said their question was, who are you, was their question. Aap kaun hai? Who are you? Now, Bhagavan's answer to that question of who are you is a beautiful reply. He says your very question of asking who are you is a faulty question. If you claim to be those who are on the path to enlightenment, even asking me who are you is not the right question to ask. Why? Terms like I, you, that, they, them, those, that's all relative. Just like yesterday we said, we say someone is smart because in relation there are people who are. We say people are beautiful because in relation to them there are people who are. They fell down the ugly tree and hit every branch on the way down. That's why we say that. Again, I and you and everything is relative only. From which standpoint am I speaking? Because if there was no I that I consider to be this entity, there would be no you either. And forget they, them, all that stuff wouldn't be there as well. I'm not talking about pronouns here. I'm not going that direction. I'm saying that, they, those, them. That's what I'm pointing at right here. Okay, still a Vedanta conversation. But now, also to be seen is, these standpoints are used in Shastra in a beautiful way also. If we look at Tulsidasji's Ramayana, Tulsi Ramayana, there's one part in there where when Bhagavan is in Vanavas and moving around everywhere during Aranyakanda, there are two words that Tulsidasji uses to designate location. Iha and Uha. Words in Avadi, Iha and Uha. Iha means here, Uha means there. But when he's talking, the confusing part is, Iha and Uha often changes. It doesn't always mean here or there. Wherever Bhagavan is becomes Iha, and Uha is whatever Bhagavan is not there. That's his descriptor. It's like when we think of the term Air Force One as the president's plane, right? It's not just that plane that's Air Force One. Whichever aircraft the president is in becomes the call sign of Air Force One. That's the closest example I could think of. So from Tulsidasji's perspective, Bhagavan is on his mind so effortlessly. Here means the only place Bhagavan is, that is what is here, closest to him. Iha becomes that location. So if he's in Ayodhya, Iha is Ayodhya, everywhere else is Uha. If he's in the Aranya, in the forest, Iha is Aranya, Ayodhya is Uha at that point. That's how standpoints change. So when standpoints change so flimsily like that, so easily like that, this whole idea of I am this and therefore you are that, our very wording is faulty there. And grammar can get us in trouble so much, right, if we don't know it well. One man, he was feeling proud of his position. He said, "Who is the station master? I is the station master." Some person came up to him and said, "No, no, no. It's not I is the station master. It's I am the station master." He said, "Oh, thank you, thank you. Who am the station master? I am the station master." So like that, grammar gets us in trouble. Grammar is useful for us here. The very fact that we use these terms means everything is relative. There is a substratum beyond all of it. So the question that you should be asking, Bhagavan says, is, who am I, not who are you? That's the very first lesson he gives to them. Before even taking their question that they have, first lesson he gives them is, don't ask who I am. Ask yourself, who am I? That's the very first quest. Turning inwards means that. Then he goes further. 24th shloka, oh, this is a beautiful one here. Because the question that arises is, there still has to be an I and a you in all of this. How do I understand this world as non-dual if all I see is plurality and duality? How is that supposed to make sense? Manasa vachasa drishtya gruhyate nyairapindriyaihi ahameva namattonyat iti buddhyadvam manjasa. He says by anjasa, inquiry, is how you understand that there is nothing apart from me. Me meaning Bhagavan is saying this, there is nothing apart from me. How do we even come to that conclusion then? This is where we have to delve in to see a Mahavakya. Mahavakya is any statement that indicates my infinitude. Any statement that breaks this notion that I am this finite assemblage is a Mahavakya. There's not a finite number of Mahavakyas. Any statement that tells me about my infinitude, Mahavakya. The most famous of which is used in the Chandogya Upanishads where it's revealed, is Tat Tvam Asi. Tat referring to that cosmos, that Bhagavan, the substratum of which is that Brahman. Tvam, from the standpoint of the individual jiva, that substratum, that support is that Atma. Asi, one and only. That's how Bhagavan says there is nothing apart from me, there is only one. Now, why is this wording so precisely important right here? Because Tattvamasi, in a nutshell, we just saw. Any other interpretation of that Tattvamasi is incorrect. Why? Because if we were to say, I am like Bhagavan, there are different sampradayas that say these things, that how can you say there is one and only? At the most, we are made in that image of Bhagavan. We are like Bhagavan, but we are not that. The wording there would be, Tat iva tvam asi would be the wording there, wouldn't it? Iva means like in a simile. Tat iva tvam asi would be the words right there. Now, if we were to say, I am for that Bhagavan. It's not that there's one and only. There's still me separate from Bhagavan. I am for that Bhagavan. I dedicate my whole life to serving that Bhagavan, offering all actions to that Bhagavan. That wording would have been, Tasmai Tvamasi would have been that wording. Fourth case, Tasmai Tvamasi, for the sake of that Bhagavan, offering unto him. Then some people say, no. We are from that Bhagavan is the real thing. We're sustained by that Bhagavan. We come from that Bhagavan, nurtured by that Bhagavan. We merge back into him after everything. He is the cause, I am the effect. If that was the ultimate teaching, the phrase wouldn't be Tattvamasi, it would be Tasmat Tvamasi. Fifth case, back to him I go. Now some people say, no, you are his and he is yours. I'm special to that Bhagavan, he loves me as his own. That would be Tasya Tvamasi, is what that phrase would be. Not Tattvamasi. Sixth case, Tasya Tvamasi. Finally, one other objection is, it's not that there's one and only. There is a bheda, difference between jiva and paramatma. It is that he is in me and I am in him. Like those Russian dolls that they have, you unscrew one, little one, blah, blah, until there's like 6 left. He is in me, I am in him. If that was the intended import, Mahavakya would be tasmin tvam asi, not tattvam asi. Now, what's the reason I went through all of these in detail? At their own level, are any of these wrong? No. To say that I am from that Bhagavan, I am serving for that Bhagavan, I am like that Bhagavan, none of these are false. Are any of these that ultimate statement though? That's the difference. Where this Vedanta orients me toward is that there is nothing apart from me. That statement that Bhagavan makes here is that indication of the validity of this Mahavakya. Now, why do I bring this up? Because you look at a text like Srimad Bhagavatam, the claim made by some sampradayas is this is a bhakti grantha, and in our sampradaya that takes this dominion over the bhakti grantha, we don't believe in this Advaitic nonsense. Mayavadi, they call these names at Shankaracharyaji, some sampradayas. In this very Bhagavatam, Bhagavan is making this statement right here. It's not that it's a bhakti grantha, different philosophy. Whatever philosophy he's giving in Srimad Bhagavad Gita, that same philosophy he's expounding here in Srimad Bhagavatam. So when he so clearly says that there is nothing apart from me, aham eva namataha, then that's to be taken the way it should from that Advaitic standpoint. There are some within the Advaitic Sampradaya that go as far as to say any other line of thinking is a darshana, meaning a school of thought or a philosophy. They say Advaita is not even a darshana. Advaita is simply interpreting Shastra on its face the way it's meant to be interpreted, no masala added, nothing taken, nothing added. Therefore, that is the most pristine philosophy right there. We can't even call it a separate darshana, they say. This is just as Scripture is meant to be seen. And we see that clearly here. Tat tvam asi. Now, we get to shloka number 25. Shloka number 25 is where this question that they had is finally answered. Meaning, the knowledge given in Hamsa Gita by the swan starts right now. Everything else was legwork to take us up to this point, to understand what the answer to the question is. What's the answer? What was the question again? That's where we have to start, right? We go so deep into finding the answer, we forget the question. Question was, how do I separate my mind from these objects? They seem indelibly linked. Cannot be any daylight between them. How do I make that separation so that I don't get swayed by these objects? So that sattva can increase, not being carried away by rajas and tamas. Guneshva vishate chetaha gunaschetasi cha prajaha jivasya deha ubhayam gunascheto madatmanaha. He says both the objects and the mind are nothing but conditionings of that jiva. That's all it is. It's all conditionings. Because if I take this mind as some real entity, I have to separate away these objects that are just an illusion, and that real mind remains, and I've done my job. Bhagavan says that's faulty. That just as much as these objects are an impediment to that truth, this mind is also an illusion. Now, how can you so casually say this here in this part? Because yesterday in the previous shlokas, didn't we go through this whole logical process from the very beginning? Where the mind is simply that flow of thoughts. Mind has a beginning to it. Mind has an end to it. Therefore, it's not permanent. Therefore, it's unreal. If I were to take the mind as real, objects I take away from it, Holding on to that mind and saying this is what the truth is would still be the wrong way to go. This mind must also be seen as unreal. Now, to embark on that process, that's where we see from tomorrow, what is that process? So we will see frameworks given by Vedanta very clearly talking about this is how you isolate, understanding what that mind is. This is how objects are taken away from it. This is why we can't have a pluralistic vision. Next 2 days are going to be fun because that knowledge is going to be dropped on us. But to even come to this point of, not even the answer, appreciating the very question as a valid question, see how much learning we had to do before that. That's the beauty of this Vedantic line of thought. That it's not that the most basic questions are what's appropriate in this line of thinking. To even come to the basic questions of what's given in these texts, so much learning has to be done beforehand. Or else I'm just a gate crasher into Vedanta. Because if we look at our Shastra, Upanishads for example, all the Upanishads come in the form of a dialogue between a teacher and a student. And the very questions that are asked, the caliber of those is something out of this world. For example, we look at Kenopanishad. The question asked by the student there is, my eye sees the objects of the world. My mind makes sense. Seeing the eye, my mind sees that eye and then makes some cognition of what that object is. The intellect seeing my mind then comes with some remembrance of what that cognition is and makes some kind of decision making or connection there. Now, what is that thing sparking the consciousness for that intellect to function? That's not an answer. That's the very question that Kenopanishad starts with. Now, juxtapose that with what we see as high philosophy. René Descartes, right? The French philosopher. What's his famous statement? I think, therefore, I am. So that comes in his meditations. If you thoroughly read that, what his logic for saying that statement is, when there is intellectual capability, that is that spark of consciousness in the individual. So as long as that intellect is functioning, that means I am existing. I think, therefore I am. The very question asked by this disciple invalidates the very conclusion that Descartes came to. And in the world today, in the Western world, Descartes' philosophy is seen as one of the most smartest things ever. Our question in the Shastra is at a higher level than that. Imagine how high the answers are then. So with our colonial education, we are conditioned so much to worship this kind of thinking. What's given in our Shastra from the question level forward is at a fathomless level of depth. And what is that depth? We'll start exploring tomorrow. So the legwork is done. We put on our knee pads, elbow pads, helmets. That's what we did these first 2 days. Tomorrow we play ball, okay? Om Purnamadav Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Shri Gurubhyo Namah Harihi Om